Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Robert Kane stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, watching the Seattle skyline shimmer in the afternoon rain. At 42, he had built Kane Security Solutions from nothing into a multi-million-dollar empire, specializing in high-end surveillance and protection services for the city's elite. His reflection showed a man who had earned every gray hair threading through his dark brown hair, lean, sharp-eyed, with calloused hands that spoke of his journey from street kid to boardroom. 20 years ago, he'd been nobody, an orphan who aged out of the foster system, sleeping in his beat-up Camaro and working construction by day while attending community college at night. That's where he'd met Diana Walsh, a stunning blonde from old Seattle money, studying art history because she could afford to pursue passions instead of paychecks. She'd been slumming it, fascinated by his rough edges and determination. "You're going to be somebody important," she'd whispered in those early days, her fingers tracing the scars on his knuckles from countless fights defending himself on the streets. I can feel it now, as he watched her BMW pull into their Bellevue mansion's circular driveway through the security monitors he'd installed throughout their property. Bobby wondered when that admiration had curdled into contempt. Diana stepped out wearing a designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary, her movements graceful and calculated. She was still beautiful at 38, but there was something cold in her blue eyes now. Something that had been growing for years. His phone buzzed. A text from his father, William Kane, the only person who believed in him when he had nothing. "Dinner Sunday. Got some news to share." Bobby smiled genuinely for the first time that day. William had been a longshoreman who'd found Bobby sleeping in his car in the harbor parking lot 23 years ago. Instead of calling the cops, the gruff 60-year-old had offered him a job, a couch, and eventually, something Bobby had never had, a real father. The office door opened without a knock. His assistant, Patricia Hayes, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd been with him since the company's founding. "Your wife called," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "She'll be late for dinner again. Some charity committee meeting." Bobby's jaw tightened. Diana's charity work had become increasingly time-consuming over the past year, often running until late evening. He'd initially admired her dedication to helping underprivileged children, but lately, something felt off about these frequent absences. "Patricia," he said slowly, "I need you to run a comprehensive background check." "On who?" "Everyone involved with the Harbor Children's Foundation. Board members, volunteers, donors. Everyone." Patricia raised an eyebrow, but nodded. She learned not to question Bobby's instincts. They'd kept the company ahead of threats and competition for years. "How deep do you want me to go?" "Deep enough to find what they don't want found." As Patricia left, Bobby returned to the window. His reflection stared back, but now he saw something different. The calculating look of a predator who'd caught an interesting scent. He'd built his fortune by reading people, by seeing the tells that revealed their true nature. Diana had been displaying tells for months. Secret phone calls, unexplained absences, a new interest in her appearance, and most tellingly, a sudden coldness toward their intimate life. His phone rang. William again. "Bobby, you free to talk?" "Always, Dad." "Listen, I've been thinking about what we discussed last month. About making sure you're protected if anything happens to me." Bobby frowned. At 75, William was still sharp as a tack, but he'd been talking more about mortality lately. "Dad, you're not going anywhere. You're too stubborn." William chuckled, but there was something serious in his voice. "Maybe so, but a man's got to plan. I'm updating my will this week. That property portfolio we discussed, the warehouses, the apartment buildings, the commercial real estate, it's all going to you. Diana's a good girl, but this is Kane family business." The property portfolio. Bobby had helped his father build it over the years, using his connections and business acumen to guide investments. It was worth nearly $8 million now, and Bobby had never thought much about inheritance. William was like a force of nature, seemingly indestructible. "Why are you bringing this up now?" "Just a feeling." "And Bobby?" I'm doing this right. Everything's going through Arthur Hoffman. You remember him, the lawyer who helped with your incorporation papers. This will be ironclad. No loopholes, no ambiguity. After hanging up, Bobby stared at his reflection again. Two suspicious situations in one day. Diana's mysterious absences and William's sudden urgency about his will. In his line of work, coincidences were usually conspiracies waiting to be exposed. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he rarely used. Marcus? It's Bobby Kane. I need a favor. Marcus Riley answered on the first ring. A former SEAL who worked freelance security, Marcus owed Bobby several favors from jobs over the years. What do you need? Surveillance on my wife. Full package, GPS tracking, phone monitoring, the works. Can you handle it quietly? How quietly? Ghost protocol. If she's doing what I think she's doing, I don't want her to know I know until I'm ready to act. Consider it done. When do you want to start? Bobby watched Diana's BMW disappear down the street toward another late charity meeting. Tonight. Chapter 2. The Truth Unveiled. 3 weeks later, Bobby sat in his home office at 2 a.m., surrounded by photographs, phone records, and surveillance reports that painted a picture of betrayal so complete it took his breath away. Marcus had delivered everything. Location data, recorded conversations, even video footage that left no room for interpretation. Diana wasn't just cheating. She was conducting a full-scale affair with Trevor Mills, the 34-year-old director of the Harbor Children's Foundation. The same Trevor Mills whose background check had revealed a disturbing pattern. 3 previous relationships with married benefactors, each ending with significant financial settlements and mysterious donations to his organization. But it was worse than simple adultery. The recorded conversations revealed the true scope of their betrayal. Once the old man dies, she'll inherit everything. Trevor's voice crackled through the speakers. We just need to make sure she's positioned as the grieving daughter-in-law. Bobby trusts her completely. William's been talking about updating his will, Diana replied, her voice cold and calculating. He keeps saying it's all going to Bobby, but legally, as his wife, I should have rights to community property claims. Not if it's separate property acquired before marriage. But there are ways around that, especially if Bobby were to have an accident before he can contest anything. Bobby's blood ran cold as he heard his wife, the woman he'd loved for 20 years, discussing his potential murder with casual indifference. Trevor, we can't be too obvious. Bobby's paranoid about security. He's got cameras everywhere, contacts in law enforcement. If something happens to him, people will ask questions. Then we make it look natural. Heart attack, car accident, something untraceable. I know people who specialize in that kind of problem solving. The recording continued, detailing plans that made Bobby's stomach turn. They'd been monitoring William's health, waiting for the right moment. Trevor had apparently researched untraceable poisons, discussing methods that would appear to be natural deaths for both father and son. But the final betrayal came in Diana's voice, stripped of all pretense. 20 years I've wasted playing the supportive wife to that street trash. Do you know what it's like pretending to love someone so beneath you? He thinks Williams saved him, but all that old man did was delay the inevitable. Bobby was born nothing, and he'll die nothing. At least this way, his death will serve a purpose. Bobby turned off the recording and stared at his hands. They weren't shaking. That surprised him. Instead, he felt a cold calm settling over him. The same feeling he'd had in those early days when bigger, stronger men had tried to break him. The difference was that now he had resources, connections, and most importantly, time to plan. His phone buzzed, a text from William. Doctor wants to run some tests. Feeling under the weather lately. Don't worry, probably just getting old. Bobby's blood turned to ice. He immediately called Marcus. I need a full medical surveillance team on my father, starting now. Someone may be trying to poison him. Jesus, Bobby. How sure are you? Sure enough to kill anyone who touches him. Within hours, Marcus had arranged for a discreet medical team to monitor William's condition while Bobby's security specialists swept the old man's apartment for toxins. What they found confirmed his worst fears. Traces of thallium in William's coffee maker, a slow-acting poison that mimicked the symptoms of natural aging and illness. Bobby stared at the lab results, his hands finally beginning to shake with rage. They weren't just planning to kill him. They were already murdering his father. He called Arthur Hoffman, William's attorney, and arranged an emergency meeting. Arthur, a distinguished man in his 60s who'd known the Kane family for years, listened grimly as Bobby explained the situation. "We need to accelerate Williams will update," Bobby said. "And I need you to add some special provisions." "What kind of provisions?" Bobby's smile was sharp as a blade. "The kind that will destroy anyone who tries to steal from the Kane family." Over the next week, Bobby orchestrated a complex plan. First, he had Williams' food and water supply carefully monitored and replaced, stopping the poisoning while making it appear that the old man's health was continuing to decline. Medical Confederates provided false test results showing Williams' condition as terminal, giving him perhaps weeks to live. Diana played her part perfectly, showing fake concern while secretly celebrating with Trevor. Bobby watched through hidden cameras as they discussed their timeline, how they would comfort each other through the tragic loss of William, and how they would handle Bobby's subsequent accident. The irony wasn't lost on him. Diana thought she was manipulating a street kid who'd gotten lucky. She had no idea she was playing chess with someone who'd learned to think 15 moves ahead. Meanwhile, Bobby used his security connections to build a comprehensive dossier on Trevor Mills. The man wasn't just a serial seducer of wealthy women. He was connected to a network of criminals who specialize in inheritance fraud, elder abuse, and when necessary, murder for hire. Trevor's organization was a front, his charity work a cover for identifying and exploiting vulnerable wealthy targets. But Bobby's investigation revealed something even more useful. Trevor had made enemies. Serious enemies. His previous schemes had left a trail of victims, including Anthony Carrera, a Chicago businessman whose wife had died in a suspicious accident after becoming involved with Trevor. Anthony had spent 2 years trying to prove Trevor's involvement and had accumulated significant evidence that law enforcement had dismissed due to lack of concrete proof. Bobby made a call. "Mr. Carrera, my name is Robert Kane. I believe we have a mutual problem." 3 days later, Anthony arrived in Seattle, carrying a briefcase full of evidence and a burning desire for justice. Together, they crafted a plan that would give both men what they wanted: absolute destruction of Trevor Mills and everyone connected to him. "This has to be perfect," Bobby told Anthony as they sat in his secure office. "No loose ends, no escape routes. When we move, it has to be total." Anthony's smile was grim. "I've been waiting 2 years for this conversation. Trevor Mills destroyed my family. Now we destroy him." Chapter 3. The Setup. William Kane's funeral was scheduled for a gray Thursday morning in November. Of course, William wasn't actually dead. He was safely hidden in a private medical facility outside the city, protected by Bobby's best security team and enjoying the show via encrypted video feeds. The thallium had been flushed from his system, and his health was rapidly improving, though officially he died peacefully in his sleep after a brief illness. Diana played the grieving daughter-in-law perfectly, choosing a black Armani dress that managed to be both appropriately somber and subtly seductive. Bobby watched her performance with detached admiration. She really was talented at deception. Too bad for her that she'd chosen to deceive the wrong man. The funeral service was small and intimate, attended by William's old friends from the docks, some of Bobby's business associates, and of course, Trevor Mills, who appeared as Diana's supportive friend during her time of grief. Bobby noticed how Trevor's hand lingered on Diana's lower back during the reception, a gesture supposedly comforting but clearly possessive. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Trevor said to Bobby with perfect sincerity. "William was a remarkable man. Diana's told me so much about how he mentored you." Bobby shook Trevor's hand, noting the man's soft palms and manicured nails, the hands of someone who'd never worked a real day in his life. "He was the best man I knew. I'm going to miss him terribly." Diana squeezed Bobby's arm with fake sympathy. "We both will, honey, but at least he's not suffering anymore." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She was comforting him for grief over a death she had caused, planning to kill him next, all while her lover stood 3 feet away. Bobby wondered if she felt any guilt at all, or if she was simply that cold-blooded. The real performance, however, would come later that afternoon at Arthur Hoffman's law office for the reading of William's will. Bobby had spent weeks preparing for this moment, working with Arthur to craft the perfect trap. Everything had to appear completely legitimate while being absolutely devastating. At 3 p.m., the principal parties gathered in Arthur's conference room. Bobby, Diana, Arthur, and surprisingly, Trevor, who Diana claimed needed to be present for emotional support. Bobby had expected this. Diana would want her partner in crime present to hear the details of what they'd inherit. Arthur cleared his throat and began reading from the thick legal document. I, William Joseph Kane, being of sound mind and body, do hereby make this my last will and testament. The initial bequests were standard, small gifts to old friends, donations to charities William had supported. Diana fidgeted impatiently, clearly waiting for the main event. Bobby sat perfectly still, his face showing appropriate grief, while internally counting down to detonation. To my son in all but blood, Robert Kane, who has been the greatest joy of my later years, I leave the entirety of my estate, including all real property, investments, and personal belongings, with the following exceptions. Diana's eyes sharpened. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the exceptions that would give her legal grounds to contest. Arthur continued, to Diana Walsh Kane, my son's wife, I leave the sum of $1, as she has already received far more from this family than she deserves. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Diana's face went white, then red. That's impossible. As Bobby's spouse, I have community property rights. Actually, Arthur interrupted smoothly, you don't. The estate consists entirely of separate property acquired by William before your marriage to Robert. But there's more. He turned the page, and Bobby watched Diana's expression shift from anger to confusion to growing alarm. Furthermore, I am aware that attempts have been made on my life through the deliberate administration of thallium sulfate, placed in my coffee maker and other food sources with the intent to cause my death. I have documented evidence of this attempted murder, including video surveillance and laboratory analysis of the poison residue. Trevor shot to his feet. This is insane. William Kane was a sick old man who... Sit down, Mr. Mills, Arthur said coldly. I'm not finished. Diana's face had gone ash-gray. Bobby, you can't possibly believe. I believe the evidence, Bobby said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. 23 recorded conversations between you and Trevor discussing my father's murder, your plans for my death, and how you'd split the inheritance. I believe the thallium residue found throughout Dad's apartment. I believe the photographs of you and Trevor together for the past 8 months. He slid a manila folder across the table. Diana opened it with trembling fingers, revealing surveillance photos of her and Trevor in compromising positions, transcripts of their recorded conversations, and laboratory reports documenting the poisoning. This can't be true, Diana whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. Arthur reached for his phone. At this point, I'm required by law to contact the authorities. Attempted murder is a serious crime. Wait, Trevor said desperately. You can't prove we actually poisoned anyone. The old man died of natural causes. Actually, Bobby interrupted. Dad's not dead. The silence that followed was deafening. Diana and Trevor stared at him in shock, their carefully constructed plans crumbling around them. You see, when I discovered you were poisoning him, I had him moved to a secure medical facility. The funeral you attended today was for an empty casket. Dad's very much alive and recovering nicely from the thallium poisoning you subjected him to. Bobby stood up slowly, his movement predatory and controlled. Did you really think I'd let you murder my father? Did you honestly believe I was so stupid, so weak, that I wouldn't see what you were doing? Diana's composure finally cracked. Bobby, please, I can explain. Explain what? How you married me for money you thought I'd inherit. How you've been planning my murder for months. How you convinced yourself that I was beneath you when you're nothing but a parasitic whore who targeted a man stupid enough to love you. The words hit Diana like physical blows. Trevor stepped forward aggressively. You can't talk to her like that. Bobby's laugh was genuinely amused. Are you going to defend her honor, Trevor? The honor of a woman who was willing to murder two men for money? Or are you upset because your meal ticket just disappeared? Arthur cleared his throat. If I may continue, there are additional provisions in Williams will that address this exact situation. He turned to another page, his voice taking on a formal tone. In the event that anyone attempts to harm myself or my son Robert Kane, whether through violence, fraud, or other illegal means, I hereby invoke the dissolution clause of certain business partnerships and charitable commitments. Trevor's face went white. What dissolution clause? Bobby smiled coldly. The one that immediately terminates the Kane Foundation's annual donation to the Harbor Children's Foundation. That's $2 million a year that just disappeared, Trevor. I imagine your board of directors will have some questions about the sudden loss of your largest donor. But there's more, Arthur continued. Williams will also contain specific instructions regarding evidence of criminal activity discovered during the investigation of his estate. This evidence is to be provided to law enforcement, the IRS, and relevant professional licensing boards. Bobby reached into his briefcase and pulled out another folder, much thicker than the first. Trevor, meet your past. 3 previous inheritance fraud schemes, 2 suspicious deaths, 1 forged will, and approximately $4 million in unreported income from various scams. Anthony Carrera sends his regards, by the way. Trevor's legs gave out, and he collapsed back into his chair. The name Anthony Carrera clearly meant something to him. Probably the one victim who'd gotten away, who'd spent years building a case against him. As for you, Diana, Bobby continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of his rage, I've already filed for divorce. You'll get exactly what you deserve. Nothing. The prenup you signed is ironclad, and your attempt to murder my father voids any claim you might have had to community property. Diana finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. You can't do this to me. I'm your wife. You love nothing but money and yourself. Bobby cut her off. 20 years of marriage, and it was all a lie. Every kiss, every smile, every time you told me you loved me. It was all just a performance while you waited for the right moment to cash in. That's when the conference room door opened and Detective Ray Morrison walked in, followed by 2 uniformed officers. Bobby had worked with Ray on several cases over the years, providing security consultation for high-profile investigations. Sorry to interrupt, Ray said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. We have warrants for the arrest of Diana Walsh Kane and Trevor Mills on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. Chapter 4. The Reckoning Begins. The arrests were swift and professional. Diana's hysterical protests echoed through Arthur's law office as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, her designer heels sliding on the polished floor as she struggled against the officers. Trevor, by contrast, went quietly, his face a mask of defeated resignation. He knew exactly what evidence Bobby had compiled against him. This is a mistake, Diana screamed as they led her toward the door. Bobby, you know I would never hurt William. I love him like a father. Bobby watched impassively as his wife of 20 years was dragged away in handcuffs. He felt nothing, no satisfaction, no regret, just cold emptiness where love used to live. Arthur closed his briefcase with a satisfied click. The divorce papers will be filed tomorrow morning. Given the criminal charges, we can fast-track the proceedings. Diana will be fighting for her freedom, not your assets. Detective Morrison lingered after the uniforms had taken Diana and Trevor away. Hell of a thing, Bobby. 20 years of marriage, and she was planning to kill you both. Not planning, Ray. Actively trying. If I hadn't caught it when I did, Dad would be dead within the week, and I wouldn't have been far behind. The evidence you provided is solid. Phone records, surveillance footage, the poison residue. It's enough to put them away for decades. But I have to ask, how long did you know? Bobby considered the question. I suspected something was wrong for months, but I didn't know the full scope until 3 weeks ago. That's when I brought in Marcus for surveillance. Ray nodded approvingly. Marcus Riley's reputation in law enforcement circles was sterling. His evidence would be unimpeachable in court. What about the old man? When can we interview him? Dad's recovering at a private facility. The doctors say he'll be fully detoxified within another week. He's eager to testify. After Ray left, Bobby found himself alone in the conference room with Arthur. The lawyer poured 2 glasses of bourbon from a crystal decanter he kept for especially trying days. In 40 years of practice, I've seen a lot of ugly divorces, Arthur said, handing Bobby a glass. But this is something else entirely. How are you holding up? Bobby stared into the amber liquid, seeing his reflection distorted in its surface. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, all the times I should have seen what she really was. You saw what she wanted you to see. That's what makes sociopaths so dangerous. They're excellent performers. 20 years, Arthur. 20 years of living with someone who was planning to murder me. How does someone do that? How does someone kiss you goodnight while researching untraceable poisons? Arthur's expression was grim. The same way they comfort you at your father's funeral after they poison him. Diana Walsh-Kane is a special kind of evil, Bobby. The kind that wears a beautiful face and speaks with a loving voice while planning your destruction. Bobby's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Package delivered. Target acquired. The message meant that Anthony Carrera had arrived in Seattle with additional evidence against Trevor Mills, and that they were ready to proceed with the next phase of Bobby's plan. Destroying Diana and Trevor legally was just the beginning. Bobby wanted them to lose everything. Their freedom, their reputations, their futures, and most importantly, their hope. I need to make a call, Bobby told Arthur, stepping outside the office. Anthony answered immediately. It's done. Trevor's been arrested, and I provided the Chicago PD with everything they need to reopen Rebecca's case. They're issuing new warrants. Rebecca Carrera, Anthony's wife, who had died in a suspicious car accident 6 months after becoming involved with Trevor's charity work. The police had ruled it accidental, but Anthony had never stopped believing Trevor was responsible. What about the financial records? That's the beautiful part. Trevor's been running a Ponzi scheme through the foundation for years, using new donations to pay off previous commitments while skimming millions off the top. When the Kane Foundation donation disappears, the whole structure collapses. His board of directors called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Bobby smiled grimly. How long before he's completely destroyed? Financially? By the end of the week. Legally? The Chicago charges will take longer, but between the evidence you've provided and what I've compiled, he's looking at multiple life sentences. And Diana? Her connection to Trevor makes her complicit in everything he's done. Conspiracy charges, accessory to murder, fraud. She's going down with the ship. Bobby hung up and stood in the late afternoon drizzle, feeling the cold rain on his face. 24 hours ago, he'd been a man with a faithless wife and a dying father. Now he was a man with enemies in jail and a father recovering in safety. The transformation should have felt more satisfying. His phone rang. William calling from the secure medical facility. Bobby? I watched the whole thing on the video feed. You did good, son. How are you feeling, Dad? Stronger, every day. The doctors say I'll be back to full health within a month. But that's not why I'm calling. William's voice carried a weight Bobby hadn't heard before. I want you to know that what Diana said about me never liking you. That was the biggest lie of all. You saved my life, Bobby. Not just today, but 23 years ago when you let me become your father. Bobby felt his throat tighten. Dad, let me finish. I was a lonely old man heading toward a bitter end when I found you sleeping in that car. You gave me purpose, pride, a reason to build something worth leaving behind. Diana could never understand that because she never understood what real family means. She fooled me for 20 years. No, son, you fooled yourself for 20 years because you wanted to believe in the family you'd created. That's not weakness, that's hope. And hope is what separates men like us from parasites like her. After ending the call, Bobby drove through the Seattle streets, past the neighborhoods where he'd grown up rough, past the harbor where William had found him, past the mansion where Diana had played loving wife while planning his murder. The city looked different now, as if the rain had washed away illusions he hadn't realized were clouding his vision. By the time he reached his office, Marcus was waiting with updates from the ongoing surveillance of Diana and Trevor's known associates. The arrests had triggered a panicked response from their network of accomplices, associates scrambling to distance themselves, destroying evidence, making desperate phone calls to lawyers and fixers. "They're scared," Marcus reported. "Word is getting out that Trevor's operation has been completely compromised. 3 of his previous victims have already contacted law enforcement, offering to cooperate." Bobby studied the surveillance photos spread across his desk. Faces of people who had enabled Diana and Trevor's crimes, who had profited from their schemes, who had helped them target vulnerable victims. A network of predators that extended far beyond his personal betrayal. "Marcus, I want them all. All of them. Every single person who helped them, enabled them, or profited from their crimes. I want their lives destroyed as thoroughly as they destroyed their victims' lives." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's a lot of enemies, Bobby. You sure you want to start that kind of war?" Bobby thought about Diana's cold laughter as she discussed his murder, about Trevor's casual planning of William's death, about all the other victims who had suffered while these predators operated with impunity. "It's not a war, Marcus. Wars have 2 sides fighting each other. This is an extermination." Chapter 5. The Network Unravels. The Harbor Children's Foundation imploded spectacularly. By Friday morning, news vans surrounded the downtown Seattle office building as FBI agents carried out boxes of evidence. Trevor's arrest had triggered a federal investigation into charity fraud, revealing a web of corruption that reached across multiple states. Bobby watched the coverage from his office, sipping coffee while reading updates from his various sources. The foundation's board of directors had called an emergency meeting to discuss Trevor's arrest, only to discover that their organization was essentially bankrupt. Without the Kane Foundation's annual $2 million donation, they couldn't meet their financial obligations, and donors were already demanding refunds. Patricia entered with a morning briefing. Channel 7 wants a statement about the Kane Foundation's involvement. The Times is running a profile on Diana's arrest, and you've received calls from 3 different publishers interested in book rights. No statements, no interviews, no book deals, Bobby replied without looking up from the surveillance reports. This isn't entertainment. The reports made for fascinating reading. Anthony Carrera's investigation had revealed that Trevor Mills was the central figure in a network of inheritance fraudsters operating across the Pacific Northwest. They targeted wealthy elderly individuals and their adult children, using charities and social organizations as cover for elaborate long-term cons. Diana hadn't been Trevor's first married accomplice. Over the past decade, he'd cultivated relationships with at least 6 other wealthy wives, each of whom had provided inside information about their family's finances, health issues, and succession plans. 3 of those relationships had ended in suspicious deaths that had been ruled accidental or natural. But the most disturbing discovery was the systematic nature of their operation. Trevor's charity work had given him access to detailed financial information about Seattle's wealthiest families. He'd used this information to identify targets, research their vulnerabilities, and plan elaborate schemes to steal their assets. Bobby's phone buzzed, a call for Detective Morrison. "We've got a problem, Bobby. Diana's lawyer is claiming she was coerced by Trevor, that she was a victim of psychological manipulation and abuse." "What kind of problem?" "The kind where she might get a reduced sentence by testifying against Trevor and his network. The DA's office is considering a plea deal." Bobby set down his coffee carefully. "What kind of plea deal?" 15 years instead of life, with possibility of parole in 10, in exchange for full cooperation and testimony against Trevor and his associates. The idea of Diana receiving anything less than a life sentence made Bobby's vision go red. She had planned his murder with cold calculation, had poisoned his father slowly and deliberately, had betrayed 20 years of marriage for money. She deserved to rot in prison until she died. "Ray, I need to speak with the DA personally." "Bobby, I know you're angry, but..." "Not angry. Determined. Diana, Kane doesn't get to play victim after attempting to murder 2 people. I have evidence that proves she was a willing participant, not a coerced victim." That afternoon, Bobby sat across from District Attorney Sarah Chun in her downtown office. Sarah was a tough prosecutor in her 40s who had built her reputation on complex white-collar crime cases. She listened impassively as Bobby presented additional evidence that Patricia's team had compiled. These financial records show Diana's independent research into inheritance law, estate planning, and community property rights. Bobby explained, spreading documents across Sarah's desk. This isn't the behavior of a manipulated victim. This is the behavior of someone planning a heist. Sarah examined the evidence, printed emails, browser history, library checkout records showing Diana had spent months researching legal strategies for contesting wills and claiming inheritance rights. She also made 3 separate inquiries to private investigators about surveillance countermeasures. Bobby continued. She was actively planning to avoid detection, not passively following Trevor's orders. This is comprehensive, Sarah admitted. But her attorney is arguing that she was psychologically manipulated over a long period, that Trevor isolated her from friends and family, made her dependent on his approval. Bobby laughed bitterly. Isolated from friends and family? She was having weekly lunches with her book club, monthly dinners with her college sorority sisters, and spent Christmas with her parents in Portland. Trevor didn't isolate her. He recruited her. Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying Bobby's face. You want her to get the maximum sentence. I want her to get what she deserves. She planned to murder my father and me for money, Sarah. She researched untraceable poisons, discussed methods of making our deaths look accidental, and celebrated our anticipated suffering. That's not manipulation. That's malice. What about Trevor's network? We could use her testimony to bring down a larger criminal organization. You don't need her testimony. Anthony Carrera has been building a case against Trevor for 2 years. He has evidence, witnesses, and documentation of previous crimes. I can provide financial records that show the full scope of their fraud network. Diana's cooperation isn't necessary for prosecution. Sarah considered this, flipping through the evidence files. You've been thorough. I've been motivated. 2 hours later, Bobby left the DA's office with Sarah's commitment to reject any plea deal for Diana. She would face trial for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud, charges that carried a potential life sentence without parole. But Bobby wasn't finished. The network that had enabled Diana and Trevor's crimes extended beyond their immediate circle. The Foundation's board of directors had either been criminally negligent or actively complicit in the fraud. The social workers who had provided them with confidential information about vulnerable elderly clients had violated professional ethics and enabled elder abuse. The private investigators who had helped them research targets had operated outside legal boundaries. Bobby wanted them all held accountable. That evening, he met with Marcus and Anthony at a secure location, a private dining room in a hotel that Bobby's company regularly swept for surveillance devices. The 3 men sat around a polished conference table, surrounded by files, photographs, and digital evidence that represented months of investigation. Trevor's talking, Anthony reported. Not cooperating, just talking. Trying to minimize his involvement, claiming he was manipulated by Diana. Marcus snorted. Both of them are pointing fingers at each other. Classic criminal behavior when the partnership falls apart. Bobby studied surveillance photos of the Foundation's board members, wealthy socialites who had provided legitimacy to Trevor's operation while either ignoring or actively concealing evidence of fraud. What about the board? That's where it gets interesting, Anthony said. 3 of the board members received significant kickbacks disguised as consulting fees. They knew the Foundation was being used to launder money and identify targets. And the others? Willfully ignorant. They wanted the social status of charity board membership without the responsibility of actual oversight. Bobby made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. I want them all exposed. Board members, complicit social workers, corrupt investigators. Everyone who enabled this network needs to face consequences. That's a lot of powerful people, Marcus warned. Some of them have serious political connections. Then they should have been more careful about who they associated with. Anthony leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing? Bobby's smile was sharp and cold. Total warfare. We destroy their reputations, their careers, their social standing, and their freedom. Every single person who profited from or enabled these crimes faces complete destruction. That's not justice, Bobby. That's revenge. Sometimes they're the same thing. Chapter 6. The War Begins. The first casualty was Dr. Margaret Foster, a prominent geriatrician who had provided Trevor with confidential information about her elderly patient's medical conditions, family dynamics, and financial situations. Dr. Foster had believed she was helping coordinate charitable services for vulnerable clients. She hadn't realized she was enabling a criminal network to identify and target victims. Bobby's investigative team had uncovered evidence that Dr. Foster had received substantial donations to her private practice from Trevor's foundation, donations that coincidentally followed her reports on specific patients who later became fraud victims. The Washington State Medical Board received a comprehensive complaint detailing Dr. Foster's breach of patient confidentiality and her role in enabling elder abuse. The investigation moved swiftly. Within a week, Dr. Foster's medical license was suspended pending a full review. Local news outlets picked up the story, portraying her as a doctor who had betrayed her patients' trust for financial benefit. Her practice collapsed as patients fled and malpractice lawsuits were filed by families of Trevor's victims. Bobby felt no satisfaction watching Dr. Foster's professional destruction. This wasn't about pleasure, it was about consequences. People who enabled predators needed to understand that their actions had serious repercussions. The second target was harder to reach. Judge Harold Brennan had expedited probate proceedings for several of Trevor's previous schemes, allowing fraudulent wills and estate transfers to be processed without proper scrutiny. Judge Brennan's connection to Trevor appeared to be purely financial. The foundation had made substantial donations to his wife's art gallery over several years. Exposing a sitting judge required delicate maneuvering. Bobby couldn't directly attack Brennan without risking legal retaliation, but he could provide evidence to the appropriate authorities and let the system handle the consequences. The Washington State Commission on Judicial Conduct received a detailed complaint outlining Brennan's suspicious pattern of rulings in cases involving Trevor's network. The investigation into Judge Brennan triggered a broader review of his court decisions over the past 5 years. Reporters began digging into his financial connections, his wife's gallery funding, and his relationship with local charities. The resulting scandal forced Brennan to recuse himself from all pending cases while the Judicial Commission conducted its investigation. But the most satisfying target was Councilwoman Lisa Park, who had used her position on the Seattle City Council to provide Trevor with inside information about municipal senior services, housing programs, and social welfare resources. Councilwoman Park had essentially given Trevor a roadmap to Seattle's most vulnerable elderly residents. Bobby's team had recorded conversations between Park and Trevor discussing specific elderly individuals who were struggling with housing costs, medical bills, or family conflicts. Precisely the vulnerabilities that Trevor exploited in his schemes. Park had received campaign contributions from Trevor's network in exchange for this information. The evidence against Councilwoman Park was released strategically. First, leaked audio recordings appeared on investigative journalism websites. Then, financial records showing suspicious campaign contributions were provided to the Seattle Ethics Commission. Finally, testimony from Trevor's victims confirmed that their personal information had been shared without consent. The political scandal that followed was spectacular. Councilwoman Park attempted to claim she had been trying to help vulnerable constituents, but the recorded conversations revealed her callous disregard for their welfare. She resigned from the city council within 2 weeks, facing potential criminal charges for corruption and elder abuse. But Bobby's war wasn't limited to official channels. His security company had connections throughout Seattle's business and social community, and he used those connections to systematically destroy the reputations of Trevor's enablers. Richard Carver, the private investigator who had helped Trevor research potential victims, found his investigative license revoked and his client base evaporating as word spread about his role in elder fraud. Beverly Hutchins, the social worker who had provided Trevor with confidential client information, was fired from her position and blacklisted from social services work throughout Washington state. Each destruction was methodical, thorough, and irreversible. Bobby didn't just want these people to face consequences. He wanted them to understand that their lives had been permanently altered by their choices to enable criminals. The psychological impact was devastating. Several of Trevor's former associates attempted to contact Bobby directly, seeking to negotiate some kind of accommodation or understanding. They offered information, cooperation, even financial restitution in exchange for ending the systematic destruction of their lives. Bobby rejected every overture. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a reckoning. The media began to notice the pattern. A Seattle Times investigation titled "The Network's Collapse" documented how the arrest of two individuals had triggered the destruction of an entire criminal infrastructure. The article portrayed Bobby as either a dedicated justice seeker or a ruthless vigilante, depending on the reader's perspective. Bobby didn't care about media coverage. He cared about results. By the end of the month, Trevor's network had been completely dismantled. Every person who had enabled, supported, or profited from their crimes was facing serious consequences. Criminal charges, professional destruction, financial ruin, or social ostracism. But the war's most important battle was still being fought in court, where Diana and Trevor faced trial for attempted murder. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Audio recordings of Diana and Trevor discussing Bobby's murder were played for the jury, their voices cold and calculating as they planned his death. Laboratory evidence confirmed the thallium poisoning of William Kane, while surveillance footage showed Diana and Trevor's affair and conspiracy. Diana's defense attorney tried desperately to portray her as a victim of Trevor's manipulation, but Bobby's evidence made that impossible. Her independent research into inheritance law, her inquiries about surveillance countermeasures, and her active participation in planning murders demonstrated clear criminal intent. Trevor's defense strategy was equally futile. His attorney attempted to claim that the conversations were fantasy role-playing, that no actual crimes had been committed, and that William Kane's death was natural. But William's surprise appearance as a prosecution witness, very much alive and recovering from thallium poisoning, destroyed that narrative completely. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Bobby testified for 6 hours, methodically presenting evidence while maintaining perfect composure. He described discovering his wife's betrayal, investigating her crimes, and protecting his father from murder, all in a calm, factual tone that made the jury's task simple. Diana's testimony was a disaster. She broke down repeatedly, alternating between claims of innocence and accusations against Trevor. Her performance convinced no one, especially when audio recordings of her voice were played immediately after her denials. Trevor never took the stand. His attorney recognized that any testimony would only provide additional opportunities for the prosecution to present damaging evidence. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Chapter 7. Justice Served. The sentencing hearing took place on a cold December morning, 8 months after William Kane's fake funeral had triggered the elaborate trap that destroyed Diana and Trevor's network. Bobby sat in the courtroom's front row, wearing the same black suit he'd worn to his father's memorial service, watching as the woman who had planned his murder learned her fate. Diana looked haggard after months in jail awaiting trial. Her designer wardrobe had been replaced by an orange jumpsuit, her perfect makeup and styling abandoned for the harsh reality of incarceration. She'd aged years and months, and Bobby felt no sympathy for her transformation. Judge Patricia Wong reviewed the sentencing guidelines with methodical precision. Diana Walsh Kane faced charges of attempted murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, and fraud. The prosecution had recommended life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Mrs. Kane, Judge Wong said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "You have been convicted of attempting to murder your husband's adoptive father through systematic poisoning, planning the subsequent murder of your husband, and defrauding victims through an elaborate criminal conspiracy." Diana's attorney made a final plea for mercy, arguing that his client had been manipulated by Trevor Mills and deserved consideration for her previously clean record. The argument fell flat. The jury had heard Diana's recorded voice planning murders with cold calculation. The court finds that Mrs. Kane was not a victim of manipulation, but an active and willing participant in a criminal enterprise that showed callous disregard for human life. Judge Wong continued. The premeditated nature of these crimes, combined with the defendant's clear intent to commit additional murders warrants the maximum sentence allowed by law. Diana Walsh Kane, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Diana's legs gave out, and she collapsed in her chair, sobbing hysterically. Her parents, sitting in the gallery, wept openly as they watched their daughter receive what amounted to a death sentence. Bobby felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret, just the cold certainty that justice had been served. Trevor's sentencing followed immediately. His case was more complex due to evidence of previous crimes in multiple states, but the result was identical. Life imprisonment without parole, with additional consecutive sentences for his role in other suspicious deaths. After the hearing, Bobby stood on the courthouse steps with William, who had made a full recovery from the thallium poisoning. At 75, the old man looked healthier than he had in years, his eyes bright with the satisfaction of seeing his would-be murderers face justice. "How do you feel?" William asked as they watched Diana's parents emerge from the courthouse, broken by their daughter's crimes and punishment. "Empty," Bobby admitted. "I thought I'd feel something more. Justice often feels that way. It's not about satisfaction, it's about balance." Diana and Trevor disrupted the natural order by trying to murder innocent people for money. Now the balance has been restored. Bobby nodded, understanding what his father meant. This had never been about revenge, despite what some observers claimed. It had been about consequences, ensuring that people who chose to harm others faced appropriate punishment for their choices. Detective Morrison approached them with final updates on the broader investigation. "We've wrapped up the last of the network cases. Dr. Foster pled guilty to elder abuse and breach of confidentiality. She'll serve 2 years and lose her medical license permanently. Judge Brennan resigned and won't face criminal charges, but his judicial career is over. Councilwoman Park is looking at corruption charges and possible jail time. What about the other victims?" Bobby asked. 3 families are filing civil suits against Trevor's estate and the foundation. Anthony Carrera's evidence helped us reopen 4 suspicious death cases from the past decade. Trevor won't be tried for those. He's already serving life, but the families finally have answers. The network that had enabled Diana and Trevor's crimes had been completely dismantled. Every person who had profited from or facilitated their schemes faced serious consequences, from criminal charges to professional destruction to financial ruin. The elaborate infrastructure that had allowed them to operate for years had been permanently shattered. But Bobby's war had one final target: himself. Over the following weeks, he underwent a systematic review of his own life, searching for weaknesses and blind spots that had allowed Diana to deceive him for 20 years. He hired an independent security firm to audit his company's operations, ensuring that no other employees had access to information that could be used against him or his clients. He also began the process of completely restructuring his personal life. The Bellevue mansion where he'd lived with Diana was sold, the proceeds donated to legitimate elder abuse prevention organizations. He moved into a secure penthouse apartment downtown, closer to his office, and protected by military-grade security systems. Most importantly, he ended his emotional isolation. 4 months after Diana's arrest, Bobby had withdrawn from social contact, trusting no one and viewing every interaction as potentially deceptive. But William's guidance helped him understand that complete isolation was another form of defeat. Diana didn't just try to kill your body, William explained during one of their weekly dinners. She tried to kill your ability to trust, to love, to believe in other people. If you let her succeed in that, she wins even from prison. Bobby began reconnecting with old friends and business associates, carefully, but genuinely rebuilding social connections that Diana's betrayal had damaged. He also started dating again. Nothing serious, but enough to remind himself that not all relationships were built on deception and malice. The process was slow and sometimes painful. Bobby found himself analyzing every interaction, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden motives. But gradually, he learned to distinguish between reasonable caution and paranoid isolation. 6 months after Diana's sentencing, Bobby received an unexpected visitor at his office. Anthony Carrera had returned to Seattle, not for business, but to express his gratitude for Bobby's role in finally bringing Trevor Mills to justice. "I spent 2 years trying to prove that Trevor killed my wife," Anthony said as they sat in Bobby's secure conference room. "The police thought I was a grief-stricken husband chasing conspiracy theories. You made it possible to expose the truth." "We both wanted the same thing," Bobby replied. "Justice for our families. More than that, you showed me that sometimes the system needs help to work properly." Trevor's network operated for years because good people looked the other way or didn't dig deep enough to find the truth. Anthony's words crystallized something Bobby had been thinking about for months. His war against Diana and Trevor's network had revealed systematic weaknesses in how society protected vulnerable people from sophisticated predators. Elder abuse was often overlooked, inheritance fraud was difficult to prove, and criminal networks operated with impunity because their crimes crossed jurisdictional boundaries. "What if we could fix some of those problems?" Bobby asked. "What do you mean?" "A foundation dedicated to investigating and exposing elder abuse, inheritance fraud, and similar crimes. Staffed by former law enforcement, private investigators, and forensic accountants. Focused on cases that fall through the cracks of traditional law enforcement." Anthony's eyes lit up with interest. "Using your security company's resources?" "Using everything: resources, connections, expertise. Making it impossible for people like Trevor and Diana to operate without being caught." The Kane Foundation for Elder Protection was established 3 months later, funded by the proceeds from Bobby's divorce settlement and Diana's forfeited assets. The foundation's mission was simple: identify, investigate, and expose crimes against elderly and vulnerable adults, providing evidence to law enforcement and support to victims' families. Bobby served as the foundation's director, using his business expertise and security connections to build an effective organization. Anthony became the chief investigator, bringing his passion for justice and his extensive knowledge of inheritance fraud schemes. They recruited a team of former FBI agents, retired prosecutors, forensic accountants, and victim advocates. The foundation's first major case involved a suspicious pattern of deaths at a Portland nursing home, where elderly residents with substantial assets were dying unexpectedly while leaving their estates to a healthcare aide who had worked at the facility for less than 6 months. The local police had dismissed family concerns, attributing the deaths to natural causes and coincidence. The foundation's investigation revealed a sophisticated scheme involving forged wills, manipulated medications, and systematic isolation of victims from their families. Within 6 months, the healthcare aide and 3 accomplices were arrested, charged with multiple counts of murder and fraud. The case made national news, establishing the Kane Foundation as a serious force in elder protection advocacy. Requests for assistance began arriving from across the country. Families desperate for help investigating suspicious deaths, financial exploitation, and caregiver abuse. Bobby found purpose in this work that his business success had never provided. Each case represented someone's family member who deserved protection, someone's parent or grandparent who had been targeted by predators. The foundation's success meant that fewer families would experience the betrayal and loss that he and Anthony had endured. Chapter 8. The Letter. 2 years after Diana's sentencing, Bobby received a letter from her. It arrived at his office on a Tuesday morning, forwarded through multiple law enforcement channels before reaching his desk. The envelope was thin and unmarked except for his name, written in Diana's familiar handwriting. Bobby stared at the letter for several minutes before opening it, wondering what his former wife could possibly have to say after 2 years of imprisonment. Her trial testimony had been a mixture of lies, self-pity, and desperate attempts to minimize her crimes. He expected more of the same. "Dear Bobby, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand why. What I did was unforgivable, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed to write this letter, not for you, but for myself. Prison gives you a lot of time to think, and I've spent 2 years trying to understand how I became the person who could plan to murder someone I claim to love. The easy answer is to blame Trevor, to say he manipulated me into becoming something I wasn't. But that's not true. The truth is that I was always selfish, always looking for the easy path, always believing that I deserved more than I had earned. When I married you, I thought I was settling for less than I deserved. You came from nothing, and even though you built something impressive, I never stopped seeing you as beneath me. That's the real crime, Bobby, not the attempted murder, not the betrayal, but the 20 years I spent lying to both of us about who I really was. You deserved a wife who saw your worth, who appreciated your strength, who loved you for who you were instead of what you could provide. Trevor didn't make me a killer. He just gave me permission to become what I'd always been underneath, someone who would do anything for money and status. Someone who saw other people as obstacles to getting what I wanted. I know about the foundation you started, about the work you're doing to protect people like William from people like me. The other inmates think it's ironic that my crimes led to something that helps prevent similar crimes. I think it's fitting. At least some good came from the evil I chose to embrace. I won't ask for your forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I won't ask you to visit because you shouldn't have to see me. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I destroyed, and it wasn't just your trust or your marriage. It was 20 years of your life that you can never get back. I hope you find someone who sees what I was too selfish and stupid to see. That you're a good man who deserves to be loved honestly. Diana. Bobby read the letter twice, then placed it in his desk drawer next to the divorce papers he'd signed 3 years earlier. Diana's words rang with an honesty he'd never heard from her during their marriage or trial, but they came too late to matter. He felt no forgiveness, no renewed anger, no sadness for what might have been. Diana had made choices that revealed her true character, and now she was living with the consequences of those choices. Her belated self-awareness didn't change the fundamental facts of what she'd done. But the letter did clarify something important for Bobby. His war against Diana and Trevor's network hadn't been about revenge. It had been about ensuring that consequences matched choices. Diana had chosen to plan murders for money, and now she was spending the rest of her life in prison. Trevor had chosen to build a career on exploiting vulnerable people, and now he was facing the same fate. The Foundation's work was an extension of the same principle. People who chose to harm others needed to face appropriate consequences, even when the system failed to provide them automatically. That afternoon, Bobby met with Patricia to review applications for the Foundation's next major case. They'd received a request from a family in Denver whose elderly patriarch had died suspiciously after changing his will to benefit a caregiver he'd known for only 3 months. The local authorities had declined to investigate, accepting the caregiver's claim that the old man had fallen downstairs while alone in his house. The medical examiner found injuries consistent with a fall, Patricia reported, but the family hired an independent pathologist who identified defensive wounds on the victim's hands and arms. What about the will change? Executed 2 weeks before his death, witnessed by the caregiver's boyfriend and sister. The old man left his entire $3 million estate to someone he'd known for less than 90 days, cutting out children and grandchildren he'd been close to for decades. Bobby studied the case file, seeing familiar patterns in the caregiver's behavior. Isolation of the victim from family, gradual assumption of control over finances, and suspicious timing of legal changes. This was exactly the kind of case the Foundation had been created to handle. St. Anthony to Denver, Bobby decided. Full investigation, all resources. This family deserves answers. As Patricia left to make arrangements, Bobby returned to his office window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. 3 years ago, he'd stood in this same spot, suspecting that his wife was betraying him, but having no idea of the scope of her crimes. Now Diana was serving life in prison. Trevor's network was destroyed, and the Foundation was protecting families across the country from similar predators. The transformation felt surreal sometimes. Bobby had gone from a successful businessman with a secret enemy living in his house to a widower dedicated to preventing others from experiencing similar betrayals. The change had cost him his marriage, his trust in relationships, and years of emotional recovery. But it had also given him a sense of purpose he'd never experienced in pure business success. His phone buzzed. A text from William, now 77 and still recovering from the psychological impact of being slowly poisoned by someone he trusted. "Dinner tonight? I have news. Bobby smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness he'd felt all day. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever new cases the Foundation would handle, whatever personal healing still needed to happen, he had his father. Diana's betrayal had revealed the strength of that bond rather than weakening it. On my way, he texted back. The Kane family would survive and thrive, built on genuine love and loyalty instead of the manufactured affection that had nearly destroyed them both. Chapter 9. The Final Reckoning. 5 years after Diana's sentencing, Bobby stood in the lobby of the Washington State Penitentiary for Women, holding a visitor's badge and questioning his decision to be there. Diana had requested a meeting through her attorney, claiming she had information relevant to one of the Foundation's current cases. Bobby had initially refused, but curiosity had eventually overcome his reluctance. The visiting room was sterile and depressing, filled with bolted-down tables and the quiet conversations of inmates and their families. Bobby chose a table near the back, positioned to observe the entire room while maintaining privacy for whatever Diana wanted to discuss. She appeared different than he'd expected. 5 years of prison had hardened her physically. She was thinner, more muscular, with gray threading through her blonde hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of stress and regret. But her posture was straighter, her gaze more direct, as if prison had burned away pretenses that had defined her for decades. "Thank you for coming," Diana said as she sat across from him. "I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. What information do you have about the Rodriguez case?" Diana had claimed knowledge about a case the Foundation was investigating in California. An elderly widower who had died after transferring his assets to a woman he'd met through an online dating service. Initial investigation suggested the woman was part of a network that specialized in romance scams targeting lonely seniors. Maria Santos, the woman who scammed Mr. Rodriguez. She was Trevor's protege, Diana said without preamble. He trained her for 2 years before he was arrested, taught her his methods for identifying and manipulating targets. Bobby leaned forward, his interest sharpening. "How do you know this?" "Because I helped recruit her." Trevor wanted attractive women who could play different roles depending on the target. Maria specialized in the grieving widow routine. She'd identify recently bereaved men through obituaries, then contact them through dating sites or social media, claiming to understand their loss. This was new information that could break the Rodriguez case wide open. If Maria Santos was connected to Trevor's network, she might be involved in multiple similar crimes across several states. What else do you know about her operation? She works with a team, a forger who creates fake identities, a tech specialist who manages the online profiles, and a logistics coordinator who handles the financial transfers. They've been operating in California, Nevada, and Arizona for at least 3 years. Diana reached in her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Names, locations, methods. Everything I remember about how Trevor's network operated and who he trained before his arrest. Bobby examined the paper, recognizing some names from previous Foundation investigations. Diana's information could connect multiple unsolved cases across the western United States, potentially exposing a criminal network that had continued operating even after Trevor's imprisonment. "Why are you giving me this?" Bobby asked. Diana was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded on the table between them. "Because I've had 5 years to think about what I became, and I don't want other families to go through what we put you and William through." "That's not an answer." "Yes, it is. I chose to become a predator, Bobby. I chose to target someone who loved me, to plan his murder for money, to help someone else murder an innocent old man. Those weren't mistakes or momentary lapses. They were choices that revealed who I really was." Diana's voice carried a weight Bobby had never heard during their marriage. Genuine remorse mixed with clear-eyed understanding of her crimes. "I can't undo what I did," she continued. "I can't give you back 20 years of marriage built on lies, or give William back the months of slow poisoning, or restore the trust one destroyed. But I can help prevent other people from experiencing what we put you through." Bobby studied his former wife's face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. But Diana's expression was open and direct, without the calculated charm that had defined her for decades. The foundation has helped 16 families get justice for murdered relatives, Diana said. I've been following your work through news reports and letters from other inmates whose crimes you've exposed. You've become what I should have been, someone who protects vulnerable people instead of exploiting them. Bobby folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket. This information will help us save lives. I hope so. I need to believe that some good can come from the evil I chose to embrace. They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the strange circumstances that had brought them together. Bobby found himself studying Diana's hands, the same hands that had once caressed his face while she planned his murder, now calloused from prison work and marked by small scars from institutional life. Do you ever think about what might have been different? Diana asked quietly. You mean if you hadn't been planning to kill me? I mean if I had been different. If I had seen what you were really worth instead of focusing on what I thought I deserved. Bobby considered the question seriously. I think about it sometimes. But the person who could have loved me honestly wouldn't have been you, Diana. That person would have been someone else entirely. Diana nodded, accepting the brutal honesty without defensiveness. You're right. The woman who could have been worthy of your love would never have made the choices I made. Why didn't you fight the divorce? Bobby asked, voicing a question that had puzzled him for years. You could have contested the prenup, claimed community property rights, dragged the proceedings out for years. Because I knew I didn't deserve anything from you. The money, the house, the lifestyle, none of it was mine. I hadn't earned it through love or partnership. I'd been stealing it through deception. The visiting period was ending, and guards were beginning to signal for inmates to prepare to return to their cells. Diana stood slowly, her movements showing the cautious discipline of someone who'd learned to navigate a dangerous environment. Bobby, she said, I know you'll never forgive me, and I'm not asking you to, but I need you to know that destroying our marriage wasn't the worst thing I did. The worst thing was wasting 20 years of your life with someone who couldn't see your worth. Bobby stood as well, looking at his former wife, the woman who had shared his bed while planning his murder, who had comforted him at his father's fake funeral after trying to poison William, who had betrayed every promise and vow of their marriage for money. Goodbye, Diana. Goodbye, Bobby. I hope you find what I was too broken to give you. Bobby walked out of the prison into the late afternoon sunshine, feeling a sense of closure he hadn't expected. Diana's information would help the foundation solve multiple cases and protect other families from similar crimes. Her acknowledgement of what she destroyed provided a kind of ending to a story that had haunted him for 5 years. But more importantly, the meeting had confirmed something Bobby had suspected but hadn't been sure of. He was free. Diana's betrayal no longer defined him. Her crimes no longer consumed his thoughts, and her memory no longer poisoned his ability to trust and love. That evening, Bobby had dinner with William at their favorite restaurant, the same place they'd eaten the night William told him about updating his will 5 years and a lifetime ago. William was now 80, still sharp and engaged, but moving more slowly and depending more on Bobby for emotional support. How did it go? William asked after Bobby described the prison visit. Better than I expected. She gave us information that will help solve several cases, and she acknowledged what she'd done without making excuses. Do you feel any differently about her? Bobby considered the question while watching Seattle's lights reflect on the water outside the restaurant windows. I feel sorry for her, I suppose. She destroyed her own life as thoroughly as she tried to destroy ours. But I don't feel anger anymore, or betrayal, or loss. She's just someone I used to know who made choices that revealed her true character. William nodded approvingly. That's how you know you've healed. When someone who once had the power to destroy you becomes just another person whose actions have consequences. They talked about the Foundation's upcoming cases, William's health, and Bobby's tentative plans to begin dating seriously again. At 82, Bobby was ready to consider the possibility of genuine partnership with someone who could see his worth and share his values. 6 months later, Bobby stood at the altar of a small church in downtown Seattle, watching Catherine Martinez walk down the aisle toward him. Catherine was a prosecuting attorney he'd met through the Foundation's work, a brilliant, compassionate woman who understood the importance of justice and the cost of betrayal. William served as Bobby's best man, beaming with pride as his son married a woman who loved him honestly. The ceremony was small and intimate, attended by close friends and foundation colleagues who had become Bobby's chosen family. As Bobby and Catherine exchanged vows, he thought briefly about Diana, serving life in prison for crimes that had revealed the emptiness where love should have lived. Then he focused on Catherine's eyes, seeing genuine affection and respect that Diana had never felt, feeling the security of a partnership built on truth instead of deception. The Kane family had survived betrayal, attempted murder, and systematic destruction, emerging stronger and more purposeful than before. The foundation continued to protect vulnerable families across the country. Diana and Trevor served life sentences for their crimes, and Bobby had found love with someone worthy of trust. Justice had been served, consequences had matched choices, and a balance had been restored. In the end, that was enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.